You don't realize it, but there is a battle raging inside your mind right now. Two basic impulses are fighting for control: the will to power and the will to pleasure. Most people live as if this were just a matter of taste or personal choice, but it's not. It's a silent war that defines who you become, or who you fail to become. Nietzsche was blunt. Human beings are driven by a will to power, to expansion, to overcoming. But this will needs resistance. It needs challenge. The problem is that the will to pleasure, which seeks relief, comfort, and quick rewards, offers shortcuts. And the brain loves shortcuts. In the short term, pleasure seems smarter. In the long term, it destroys your power to act. If this topic makes sense to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. Every morning you face small decisions that don't seem like a big deal. Get up or snooze the alarm. Go to the gym or stay in bed a little longer. Start the difficult task or procrastinate with something easy. The thing is, every choice is feeding one of these desires. You are voting internally, every single day, and that vote is cumulative. Pleasure is seductive, silent, and almost always comes disguised as self-care or deserved. Power, on the other hand, requires confrontation. It challenges you to do exactly what your body wants to avoid. The reward? Invisible at first. But over time it becomes freedom, clarity, strength, three things that immediate pleasure never delivers. This war is not abstract. It is shaping your behavior, your discipline, your vital energy, and you need to know who is winning. Because whoever is winning inside will decide what happens outside. Your external reality is only a reflection of your internal hierarchy. The question is not whether this battle exists. It is already underway. The real question is, are you aware of which will is taking control of your life? Nietzsche was not talking about morality. He was talking about internal structure. For him, the real strength of human beings lies in what drives them, even when this does not appear in words or obvious actions. That is why the will to power can be at work within someone who appears calm, while the will to pleasure dominates those who live in turmoil. The most common misconception is to think that those who seek pleasure are just enjoying life. But constant pleasure is not synonymous with lightness, and it is anesthesia. And those who live anesthetized no longer feel pain, but they also feel no depth. Nietzsche saw pleasure as a mechanism that, if not confronted, tames the soul and makes the individual content with existential crumbs. The will to power, on the contrary, is not about dominating others. It is about dominating oneself. It is the desire to grow, to surpass what was yesterday. But this impulse, because it is internal and silent, is easily sabotaged by small concessions. Every time you choose the easy path, you weaken this force. It remains there, but caged. And the cruelest. The modern world rewards behavior shaped by the will to pleasure. The algorithm gives you more than it distracts you. Society applauds you when you adapt. And everything around you is designed for you to seek the next comfort, not the next challenge. Nietzsche did not live in the digital age, but he would have made an even more brutal diagnosis. The will to power is being suffocated by an overdose of empty stimuli. Even those who say they seek personal growth are often just disguising an escape. They use books as a distraction, spirituality as a comfort zone, goals as a placebo, because the strongest will is not always the loudest. And what looks like ambition may just be fear dressed up as productivity. In the end, what defines the dominant impulse is not the rhetoric. It is the sacrifice you are willing to make. Pleasure demands little and delivers crumbs. Power demands a lot and transforms everything. The greatest addiction of the century is not chemical. It is psychological, and it feeds on the logic of immediate reward. With every click, every swipe, every decision postponed in the name of comfort, you strengthen an invisible structure. The habit of seeking pleasure before effort. It is the new conditioning, subtle, constant, corrosive. Your brain has learned to associate effort with pain and pleasure with relief. But this formula, applied every day, creates a trap. The more you get used to avoiding discomfort, the more fragile you become in the face of reality. Difficult tasks seem impossible. Challenges become threats. Time passes, but your power does not evolve. It regresses. Nietzsche would call this internal decay, not because of a lack of ability, but because of excessive indulgence. The soul becomes lazy, not in the sense of doing nothing, but in a more subtle sense, avoiding anything that requires depth. Thus, you become an expert at shallow tasks, dependent on micro-rewards, hostage to a system that praises you for being functional, but prevents you from being free. The vicious circle sets in when pleasure ceases to be a celebration and becomes an escape, when each achievement is followed by a rush of distraction, when discomfort arises and the first reaction is not to face it, but to eliminate it as quickly as possible. But pleasure is addictive, and the more you consume it, the lower your threshold for resistance becomes. You can no longer stand the boredom, the silence, the waiting. The difficult becomes intolerable, and the easy is no longer satisfying. The result, an anxious, fast-paced, and at the same time stagnant generation. Breaking this cycle is not about stopping feeling pleasure. It's about putting pleasure back in its rightful place, as a consequence, not as a priority. The mistake was to reverse the natural order of things. Pleasure became the goal, and the challenge became the obstacle. But it's just the opposite. The challenge is the path. Pleasure is just the echo. The key to breaking the cycle lies in what you choose to do when your body wants to escape. Most people give up before they even discover what they are made of, because all real change begins with something that the modern world avoids at all costs: facing the void. That space between desire and reward, between discomfort and change. It is there, in that uncomfortable silence, that the will to power begins to awaken. While pleasure tries to distract you, there is a specific type of strength that only appears when you choose not to numb yourself. When you feel hungry and don't eat. When you feel bored and don't run away. When you feel anxious and face it. At that exact moment, something rare begins to happen. Your mind stops being a slave to stimuli and begins to reorganize itself around a new axis: self-control. Nietzsche said that endurance is an art for those who wish to dominate, but not to dominate others, to dominate oneself. Because real power is not what you achieve in the outside world, but what you stop depending on internally. And that only reveals itself in the interval, in the space between wanting and doing. In the moment when you realize you can, but decide not to. This pause, this vacuum, is where you build your margin of power. This is where the difference between an ordinary human being and someone who creates their own discipline is born. The difference between someone who reacts to the world and someone who reconfigures the world based on their resistance. But the problem is that almost no one can stand to be disconnected from stimuli for even 5 minutes. The phone vibrates and your attention is gone. Fatigue sets in and your mind gives up. Everything invites relief, but that relief comes at a high cost. It steals your accumulated energy that could be directed towards something great, but is wasted on micro-pleasures that build nothing. The energy you lose by giving in is the same energy you would gain by resisting. Emptiness, when endured, becomes fuel, but when avoided, it becomes weakness. The difference lies in the invisible choice. Hold on for 5 more minutes or give in to the first impulse. Every time you avoid a challenge, you lose an opportunity to expand, not only in skill, but in presence. Because the challenge is not only physical or mental, it is a direct trigger to awaken the dormant consciousness. And that is why the will to power is strengthened in confrontation. It needs resistance to grow. Starting the day by facing something difficult completely changes your internal structure. Not because the world changes, but because you reposition yourself in relation to the world. A body that has been tested early on gains focus. A mind that has voluntarily faced tension gains clarity. And a spirit that has overcome the first impulse to flee takes control of the rest of the day. Nietzsche saw challenge as an existential ritual, a small confrontation with reality that separates those who want to truly live from those who just want to get through life unscathed. It is there, in the moment of doing what you don't want to do, that your internal hierarchy is revealed. If you act even without wanting to, it is the greater will that is in charge. If you give up at the first sign of discomfort, it is pleasure that commands you, disguised as self-protection. Putting a challenge before any reward is like reversing the code of modern conditioning. It is rewriting the logic that has been implanted in you since childhood. Comfort first, effort later. The effect is immediate. You feel resistance, but you also feel energy, a kind of internal awakening that does not come from outside, nor from praise, nor from results. It comes from the simple fact of having gone against the easiest impulse. And this daily training doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be a cold shower, an intense workout, a difficult task right after waking up. What matters is not the action itself, but the willingness to challenge your body before being rewarded. This changes your chemistry, your discipline, and most importantly, your perception of yourself. Because once you win the first battle of the day, the others don't seem so big. And at that moment, it's not that the world has become easier, it's that you have become stronger. What seems like freedom may just be a new kind of prison. More comfortable, more disguised, but still a prison. And that's what constant pleasure represents when it's not controlled. A golden cell, where the soul loses strength while the body gets used to not feeling pain. The quick reward is addictive, and the addiction makes any other option unbearable. What starts as a choice becomes an addiction. Today, a little frustration is enough to make you seek immediate relief. Food, distraction, artificial dopamine. And without realizing it, you condition your mind to only function under positive stimuli. This is more serious than it seems. It means that your inner strength is outsourced. It only appears if there is a reward involved. Nietzsche saw modern humans as domesticated, not in the physical sense, but mentally. Domesticated by small rewards, instant validation, routine comforts that weaken the will. Pleasure in this context is not rest. It is control. You think you are free, but in reality you are just following invisible commands. Feel good now, or freeze. The result? A human being who runs away from any process that involves pain, doubt, or delay. A being who chooses shortcuts, ignores effort, and sabotages themselves with sophisticated justifications. After all, who is going to judge you for wanting to feel good? The problem is that the more you give in to this pattern, the harder it becomes to live without it. And there lies the most brutal point. Pleasure becomes a necessity, and necessity becomes a leash. But you weren't born to be tamed. You were born to grow. And growth requires pain, imbalance, discomfort, not as punishment, but as a stage. However, modern conditioning has eliminated these stages. It wants to give you everything now, even if it costs you power later, and you may not realize it until it's too late, until the emptiness of easy pleasure starts screaming louder than any achievement, until you realize that you are surrounded by stimuli and yet feel weaker and weaker inside. True power is not loud. It does not show off. It does not seek applause. It does not need to be recognized. It just acts, silently, consistently, deeply. This is what differentiates the will to power from the superficial performance we see every day on social media. Real power does not need to prove anything. It just transforms the environment with its presence. Nietzsche understood this as an internal upward movement, a force that grows from the inside out and does not depend on the gaze of others to exist. But this force is only born when you resist the temptation to show quick results, when you opt for slow construction, when you choose discipline over exhibition, process over validation. We live in a culture of immediate results. Showing overcoming adversity has become a spectacle. But the will that truly changes a life is not the one that speaks. It is the one that persists. It doesn't matter if it is seen, praised, or understood. What matters is that you continue. What matters is that, in silence, you go beyond what you were yesterday. This is the true exercise of the will to power. To remain steadfast while everyone else gives up. This kind of strength doesn't impress in the short term, but it redefines destinies in the long run. It is the power of those who build without haste, who don't trade effort for comfort, who understand that consistency is a form of faith, faith in themselves, faith in the process, faith in the silent impact of daily choices. But to sustain this stance, you must understand that the absence of applause is not failure. It is freedom. You are no longer being guided by external stimuli. You are being driven by an internal commitment, a silent pact with your own evolution. And that gives you an invisible advantage. While others oscillate between excitement and giving up, you become relentless. While others follow what brings pleasure, you follow what brings purpose. And that is what builds a strength that no one can take away, because it depends on no one but you. Silent consistency is the language of those who already understand. True power lies in those who continue. Every decision you make reveals the invisible structure that commands you. And most of the time, that structure is not rational. It is instinctive, shaped by patterns you no longer even notice. What appears to be free will is often just an automatic response to an architecture of choices that favors pleasure and sabotages power. Nietzsche would say that man is shaped by his habits, not his speeches. You can say you want to grow, evolve, master your life. But if your daily choices prioritize comfort, that is the will that is winning. The will that manifests itself in small moments, getting up when it's hard, saying no to what seems good now, enduring discomfort without negotiating. What is controlling you today? The quick relief or the vision that takes time but transforms? The pleasure that distracts you or the effort that guides you? These questions seem simple, but they are crucial, because they define who you are becoming. The architecture of modern choice is designed to prevent you from thinking. Everything is done to reduce friction, one-click shopping, food in minutes, endless distraction in your pocket. But every time you choose the easy path, you are training your brain to always seek the least effort, and that comes at a high price. You become more efficient at running away and less capable of resisting. The problem is that the more you outsource your decisions to immediate desire, the further you move away from your own autonomy. You think you're choosing, but you're just reacting, and reacting is the opposite of commanding. The will to power requires a different kind of architecture, one that puts challenge before reward, discomfort before distraction, purpose before pleasure. This doesn't happen by accident. It's an active construction, an internal reform that begins when you decide to stop the automatic and observe, why am I doing this now? Who is deciding? My consciousness or my conditioning? Consciousness only awakens when you begin to question the small choices, because it is these choices, when accumulated, that define your destiny. There is a widely sold illusion that freedom is doing what you want when you want, but that is the childish version of freedom. True freedom is not about following impulses. It is about controlling impulses. And for Nietzsche, this is only possible when the will to power overcomes the addiction to immediate reward. Constant pleasure makes you feel loose, light, in control, but it hides a trap. You only feel good when everything is easy. If something requires sacrifice, effort, or waiting, your autonomy disappears. That's not freedom. That's sophisticated dependence. You move, but only within an invisible fence. The will to power proposes another logic. Instead of seeking what gives you pleasure, seek what strengthens you, even if it hurts, even if it takes time, even if it seems thankless, because it is in this choice, painful and conscious, that you reconnect with your own direction. And self-direction is the heart of freedom. When you choose to face the difficult, you are not punishing yourself. You are training yourself. You are telling your nervous system, I am not driven by relief. You are showing your mind that it does not need comfort to act, that it can act out of clarity, conviction, and long-term vision. And most surprising of all, the more you move in this direction, the more pleasure changes form. It ceases to be a compulsion and becomes a consequence. You begin to feel pleasure in overcoming yourself, in keeping internal promises, in building something that no one else sees, but you know is there. It is deep pleasure, the kind that does not numb you, but affirms you. Freedom begins when you can say no to what is easy, without suffering, when pleasure no longer dictates your pace or your choices, when you start the day with the difficult tasks, not as a sacrifice, but as an exercise in sovereignty. And sovereignty is not control over the world. It is control over yourself. It is knowing that even when everything invites you to flee, you remain steadfast, lucid, driving your own will. That is the power that pleasure will never deliver. Now it's no longer about Nietzsche or philosophy. It's about you. After all this, only one real question remains. Who is winning inside you? Because this battle has never been conceptual. It is practical, everyday, brutally real. The will to power and the will to pleasure are at war every morning, with every silent decision, with every invisible gesture. If you've made it this far, you know that constant pleasure is not freedom, it's control. You know that strength is not born from stimulation, but from resistance, and that every small challenge you face is a silent victory of your consciousness over conditioning. This is the final structure. Power is not in what you feel, but in what you sustain. It is not in what you receive, but in what you refuse. What Nietzsche tried to show, and what this script has outlined, is that your life is a direct reflection of the will you feed. If you choose comfort, relief, immediate pleasure, you are shaping an increasingly fragile, reactive, centerless self. But if you choose intentional effort, voluntary sacrifice, conscious confrontation, you are building an internal structure that no one can take away. The score isn't seen in external results. It's seen in your responses to discomfort. It reveals itself when something gets out of control and you don't run away, when motivation ends and you keep going, when the world invites you to get distracted but you choose to stay focused. Therein lies the truth. And the truth is hard, but liberating. Either you control your will, or it will control you. Most people want change without friction. They want evolution without discipline. They want pleasure without sacrifice. But that equation will never add up, because the pleasure that comes before effort weakens, and the pleasure that comes after effort strengthens. You already know this. The question is, what are you going to do now with this knowledge? Did you like the video? Then subscribe to the channel and comment. What challenge will you face tomorrow before seeking any reward?